Silence speaks volumes. It's a phrase that means sometimes the absence of words in and of itself can convey a great deal. Of course, typically it's employed in a metaphorical way, of a refusal to speak out on an issue, of a problem left unaddressed. In the case of Hoyoverse's flagship games, Honkai Star Rail and Genshin Impact, however, silence, pure, still silence, says absolutely everything. And that's what I'll be talking about.
So, we've lost our shared humanity over a f***ing gotcha.
And I'm so grateful that the people who watch my videos are based like this, who see through the nonsense that SAG-AFTRA continues to peddle.
Gotta be bloody stupid, freaking evil to stand. Or I guess scared, maybe. Scared of what?
So I wasn't originally going to make this video for a number of reasons. I wouldn't primarily label myself as a voice actor, though I've done plenty of it on my channel. I've never been involved in any serious professional projects, and while my content has become inextricably linked to Star Rail and, to a lesser extent, Genshin, I'm by no means an important figure in either of those spaces. So it felt like I'd just be shouting my thoughts into the void if I tried to talk about all of this. All in all, I had felt content to just let this be a passing fascination and focus on Honkai Star Rail Funny Moments number 37 compilation. As much as I'd like to say that what motivated me was to stand up against the soulless tide of capital and artificial intelligence, or to show solidarity for a field that I revere so greatly, I'd be lying. In truth, I knew I had to make this when I saw that the most popular video covering the situation was made by that disgusting reactionary Hero Hey, whose existence on this platform I've loathed for the past several years, and the video itself is just corporate bootlicking and anti-union slop. In fact, most of the reason I've stuck to content creation for so damn long, despite it paying like garbage and getting perpetually screwed over by the algorithm, was the knowledge that if I did quit, I'd be outlasted by Hero fucking Hey, so not gonna happen. But this video isn't about that talentless hack or his god-awful videos. Let's get back to talking about the Genshin Impact situation. As I'm writing the script, more and more videos are coming out about this, and the trend that I've observed is that content creators really lack the foundational understanding of labor movements and collectivism to tackle the topic with any degree of seriousness. There is an epidemic failure within the community to understand what's really happening, resulting in people directing all the wrong questions towards all the wrong people. Genshin fans will watch Joe Zieha's video on the Genshin Impact strike and see a reasonable, thoughtful, and panoptic narrative of the situation. And while I appreciate the production value and effort put in, what I see is a fundamental misunderstanding of how workers' rights are gained and upheld. First of all, I'm more than happy to admit that my perception is very much informed/biased by the membership that I have in my workplace's union. My union membership guarantees health insurance, reasonable working hours, a fair salary, protection from firing without just cause, and a myriad of other benefits. Unions are and have always been an extraordinarily important source of protection and advocacy for the working class, and this is more important now than ever before for professional voice actors and actresses. On June 26, 2024, SAG-AFTRA, a union representing over 160,000 professionals in the entertainment industry, went on strike in order to secure the protection of its talents from being exploited by video game employers, specifically to prevent them from using artificial intelligence to replicate their likeness without compensation. Now, a lot of people have the misconception that the problem begins and ends with Hoyo agreeing to AI protection policies for its talents, but unfortunately, it's just not that simple. In fact, technically none of the studios that Hoyoverse works with are even being struck. To really understand how the situation is and how it came to be, you're gonna need to understand the process of how a sound made by a person eventually winds up becoming a sound made by a character in a game, and all the intricacies involved. So let's start small, then work our way up the proverbial food chain. A professional voice actor/actress who may or may not be a member of a union, say SAG-AFTRA for instance, will typically develop a demo reel which they send to a talent agency. Game companies may reach out to said talent agency to voice their game. Negotiations are made, and then the talent agency would get their talent to come into the studio, record lines, and the agency will then send them to the company. Seems pretty simple so far, but there's a lot of moving parts which complicates things quite considerably. Let's say a game company hears of this trendy new AI technology which would effectively allow them to copy a voice actor or actress's voice without needing to pay them, saving them thousands of dollars. If this technology is implemented on a widespread scale, this would effectively destroy the voiceover industry. Naturally, this is not in the best interest of the collective will of voiceover talents, so they will demand that safeguards be put in place. Obviously, corporations couldn't care less about ruining the lives of thousands of artists and performers to save a quick buck, so they refuse. Without any collective bargaining power, the voice talents would just have to sit and watch as they are essentially cheated out of their hard work by corporate vultures. But, fortunately for them, remember the whole union thing we talked about earlier? That's where they'll come in. A strike is called, and now all voice acting for companies being struck is frozen until the union's demands are met. Notice how I said all. Even non-union voice talents are expected to abide by the strike, as it is still very much in their best interest as voice talents to be protected from AI exploitation. Now you may be asking, doesn't this mean that essentially no games from any of these companies can be voiced indefinitely? Yes and no. There is no deadline for a final agreement to be made between the union and the struck companies. However, SAG-AFTRA has offered an interim agreement during the strike, which, if the struck producer applies for it, would allow everyone involved to resume their work while negotiations are continued. So, Hoyo can just sign the interim agreement and be good to go, right? Well, actually this time, yeah. We would be able to have voiced EN characters once again if Hoyo were just to ratify the agreement. Now, I won't go through the entire contract, and I encourage you to read it in its entirety. Link will be in the description. As another disclaimer, I'm no legal expert, but the contract itself, in my opinion, is more than reasonable. Some of the conditions in it are as follows: a 6.74% raise in pay, disallowing digital replication including generative AI, rest periods of at least 5 minutes per hour worked, $60 a day for meal allowance, overtime pay, compensation for late payments, healthcare contributions, medical provisions on site. Again, I'm not an industry insider, nor versed in contract law, but I think that these are not only reasonable, but should be expected regardless of a strike. So, timeout though. Didn't you say before that none of the studios that Hoyoverse works with are even being struck at all? Why would Hoyo even need to sign this agreement in the first place? Hoyoverse has worked with 3 notable studios: Rocket Sound Studio, primarily responsible for Honkai Star Rail dialogue, Sound Cadence Studios, primarily responsible for Zenless Zone Zero dialogue, and Formosa Ocean Post, primarily responsible for Genshin Impact, which is the troublemaker. Formosa Ocean Post is owned by Formosa Interactive LLC, which is a struck company. Formosa was, and assumedly still is, a pretty awful studio, not just for its refusal to agree to AI protection for its talents, but also for a track record of delayed payments and other infractions. Fortunately, it seems like Hoyo has parted ways with Formosa, with Side Studio, another company, essentially taking its place. Now, I know all of that sounded probably as dull and incomprehensible as Luofu dialogue, so where does that leave us? Well, it's complicated. Is Hoyoverse at fault? It depends on who you ask. I'd say that none of this was directly or indirectly caused by any action taken by them. However, it's more of a guilt by association. Hoyoverse happened to hire Formosa, who happened to be really shitty, so that's how they got involved with the strike. And while they no longer do business with Formosa, the stakes have been raised, so to speak, and people are starting to understand just how important the strike is to the future of voice acting as a whole. However, I'd argue that Hoyo isn't exactly on the side of the voice actors and actresses anyways. If I were a performer for a Hoyoverse game, I'd certainly be nervous of being replaced by AI. And before you comment on how ridiculous that is to suggest, I'm saying this because they literally did. In the game Tears of Themis, a Hoyoverse game, the character Vin Richter is voiced by an AI due to Jiang Guangtao, Vin's CN voice actor, having been arrested, reportedly for misappropriating over $2 million worth of public funds. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. While the actor did give permission to be replaced by AI, there is nothing No legal rulings nor company policy that would prevent Hoyoverse from doing that to any voice actor or actress today in America. Right now, Hoyoverse is essentially trying to work around the strike, slowly replacing striking talents. You saw that with Tingyun, Argenti, Huohuo, and Mr. Tail, and more recently Kinich, Soldier 11, and Von like, I don't play that game, I don't know. Basically, just do the interim agreement. Even if it means that Hoyo becomes union only, then all the better if you ask me. Stronger unions means better conditions for workers and less ability for companies to exploit them, which is probably the exact reason they haven't signed it. There's been this gotcha moment I've seen tossed around a lot, where SAG-AFTRA has a clause in their agreement which states that a company who does not hire a union performer would need to compensate the union $500 for each infraction. I've seen so many people claim that this is the smoking gun of how it's all an evil union power grab, and it still blows my mind. There's a lot of historical context behind this section that needs explaining. And while you typically hear from other content creators how much they don't want to make this video, brace yourself for the scary word, political, you already know that's not how I move. The Taft-Hartley Act, which was explicitly named in this section, was a piece of legislation passed in 1947, which severely weakened the power of labor unions. Of course, this was stated to combat the totally real and not made up threat of communist infiltrators in America. But in actuality, it just further consolidated the power of the American bourgeoisie. This is a trend you'll notice in American history for the next 70 years. The Taft-Hartley Act states the following. An employer cannot refuse to hire prospective employees because they won't join a union. Essentially, the aim of this was to prevent contractual agreements where companies would only be allowed to hire union members, what's known as a closed shop. This is also part of the reason why everything sucks in America, and you probably aren't being given things like healthcare, reasonable working hours, better wages, etc. This crippled the bargaining power of unions, allowed freeloaders who get the benefits of unions without paying their dues, and is still being fought to be overturned to this day. It's also the reason why so many jobs in industries like manufacturing have been shipped overseas. Unions became far too weak to fight back, so companies were able to replace this domestic workforce with what is essentially slave labor in occupied/exploited third world countries. The more you know. I wasn't sure where to fit this into the script, so I'm just gonna throw it in here. I don't know how many times it needs to be proven throughout history for us to finally get it, but corporations aren't on your side. Unions are. Stop playing defense for Hoyoverse and other billion-dollar companies. They're not going to let you hit, they're just going to steal your surplus value. As such, another clause was included in the Taft-Hartley Act. However, an employer has the right to sign an agreement with a union that requires an employee to join the union on or before the employee's 30th day of employment. As we discussed earlier, SAG-AFTRA includes a penalty for violating this, which states the following. Employer shall pay to SAG-AFTRA as liquidated damages the sum of $500 for each breach by the employer of the provisions of this section. Any breach of this section is subject to arbitration. Each time the employer hires a performer in violation of this section, it shall be considered a separate breach irrespective of the number of days of employment. Start. Before I finish this sentence, Hoyoverse has already made the $500 that they would need to pay for violating this rule. They could not care less about this penalty. Stop. This outrage towards having to pay $500 for crossing the picket line is absolutely absurd, especially since this kind of fine is something that you see all the time. Take the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, for instance, a massive union who charges anywhere between $500 to $3,000 each time their employer hires outside the union. This is standard practice for a union contract, which, if anything, is extremely lenient. The most prolific sentiment online, at least from what I observed from various content creators and commenters, is something like this. A vague expression of sympathy for the fears of voice talents of having their entire livelihood stolen from them by AI replication, followed by a diatribe against the protective provisions that the union set in place for the performers, and a deep concern for the feelings of the scab, and yes, I said scab, who should just be able to replace the striking voice actor in peace. Like almost all opinions from the Genshin fanbase, frankly, this is ignorant and harmful, and I want to talk about it. Yes, it's time to get into the Kinich controversy. In August of 2024, the Genshin Impact character Kinich was introduced, played by actor John Patnode, along with many other characters in Genshin such as Paimon, Aether, Kachina, Gilonin. Warning, I'm going to mispronounce a lot of stuff. Kinich's dialogue would not be voiced as a result of the strike starting in, I believe, October of 2024. My timeline could be a little bit messed up though. It should be noted that not all of the striking voice performers are union members. Many of them were striking in solidarity, as was urged by SAG-AFTRA. When people online say that the voice actors are not striking, just refusing to work, do they not realize that striking is refusing to work? Now, many people, often through no fault of their own, are misinformed of organized labor movements and would say that this is pointless and depriving themselves of work and the game of its voices for no reason. I attribute a lot of this to the American union-busting brainwashing that we've all been exposed to for basically all of our lives. More on that later. In March of 2025, John Patnode was replaced by Jacob Takanashi as Kinich's voice actor, sparking a huge amount of controversy within the fanbase. The most important aspect of any progressive movement, for my money, is solidarity. During the Montgomery bus boycott of the civil rights movement, for instance, many white Americans refused to ride the bus in solidarity with the black community who were boycotting it due to the practice of segregation, though obviously they were largely apart from the movement rather than a part of it. People at the time would have likely said the same stuff they're saying today about how pointless it was, and how they were inconveniencing and harming themselves for no reason. But this divestment was certainly helpful for the movement's ultimate success. If the company was able to easily replace all of the people participating in the boycott, as they tried to do, the movement wouldn't succeed, plain and simple. As for those who still rode the Montgomery bus during this time, how would you say history should judge them? Sure, it may not be accurate to say that each and every individual shares the responsibility for allowing injustice to occur, but it's not too much of a stretch to say that each of them contributed to the problem rather than taking steps to solve it, and made it more difficult for those pushing for progressive change. Did some of them really need to ride the bus out of absolute necessity? Conceivably. Were some of the riders outright ignorant of the ongoing situation? I suppose it's possible, but neither of these reasons absolve them of their responsibility. And I hope this illustrates how the same right to ride argument was just as flimsy and nonsensical back then as the right to work argument right now. The incident that has caused so much uproar within the Hoyoverse games community is also the one that, in my opinion, is the least important thing that has happened during this entire situation. In March of 2025, Paimon voice actress, I should have realized how to spell this beforehand, Karina Bedger, tweeted what was essentially a subliminal shot at Jacob Takanashi, who, as previously mentioned, took the role of Kinich from John Patnode. Now, reactionary Genshin fans, including sexual abuser Tectone, essentially went berserk about this, calling it disgusting, raving about how Jacob Takanashi is living in Japan, as though somehow taking the job of a striking worker isn't scabbing if you're living in another country. My favorite one is the excuse that, well, Jacob Takanashi probably doesn't even know about the strike situation, so they shouldn't be allowed to be criticized. Which, on one hand, is so unbelievably unlikely, it's almost funny, and on the other is also a completely ridiculous premise logically speaking. Ignorance of the context by which you make a living doesn't absolve you of its consequences, nor should it. When the Honkai voice performers made comments in support of longtime abuser Chris Niosi, not knowing the extent of their inexcusable behavior, they were rightfully met with staunch criticism. Them not knowing about the situation was obviously not a proper defense, and the same logic obviously applies in the case of Takanashi taking John Patnode's job. There's an oft-repeated line from Joe Zieha's video on the Genshin situation. We've lost our collective humanity over a gacha game. So this sounds nice, but no. You've lost your class consciousness because you've been tricked into thinking that decorum and corporate interests are more important than the collective well-being of yourself and your peers. Zieha's sentiments effectively mirror the collective viewpoint of the community, including its dangerous ignorance. Even a figure as prominent as Zieha seems unaware that worker disempowerment doesn't just happen overnight, and that each concession from the working class, as seemingly insignificant as it may seem, can cause a domino effect that leaves us exploited and without a way to claw our way back, aka how we're in the position we're in right now. Like we see time and time again, so much of this discourse is underscored by a capital T toxic positivity that just wants an outcome with minimal fundamental change, where everybody can walk away happy and all parties win, when the cold reality of this future would be one where the voice acting profession itself is gutted and left up for grabs by the same corporate vultures that have dissected all things beautiful and good in our world for their own insatiable greed. Despite all that I've seen over and over again, I have to force myself to believe that this time we'll understand the importance of preventing our art form from being co-opted by the corporate interests who have taken so much from us already. So, a bit of a heavier one there. And, a bit of a departure from what I normally do. I've done previous video essays, but I've never really just been speaking into the camera. It's a little weird. I'm technically speaking into a teleprompter, which I have now, so that's cool. Shoutouts to my Patreon supporter, MinerDude369. And also subscribe for more, of course. I do have plans for other videos that's similar to this. Namely, I have a roughly 10-page script written out about the Freerin discourse, and how everyone's wrong, except for me. Hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for more.
Anyway, $4 a pound.